I have to be careful about things I say because I'm literally going to piss off a huge amount of people. I owe it to the people who watch this video to be as honest and realistic as possible. It's the best thing I can do. This is not like some big revelation that, oh, we're gonna expose the experimental aircraft industry. Like that's not what we're trying to do here. It's just being a source of honesty about the process. So you clicked on this video because you're probably thinking, hey, I can build my own aircraft. Well, I thought that too, and it turns out I actually did. I built my own plane, it's sitting behind me. It took me about 1.5 years, and I've done a video specifically talking about this Kitfox, how I feel about flying the particular model. And I haven't really talked about my full experience building the aircraft. I have an entire series of videos, it's probably 20 videos long, that basically walks through the entire build process that I had to go through to build this aircraft. But now that I've built it, I'm done, and I have 106 hours on the airframe, I want to sort of talk and share my thoughts about what it's like to truly build an aircraft, more specifically this particular Kitfox. Now, every aircraft is different when you build them, but there's some general themes that I think are pretty universal to building a plane that I wanted to share with anybody who was interested in building a plane, because I wish somebody had shared their thoughts and reflections. So anyway, here we go. I want to talk about the sort of backstory and how I ended up with this Kitfox in particular, and sort of the timeline and how I got to where I am today. So I put a deposit on this aircraft in June of 2019, and I ended up taking delivery of the kit in March of 2020. So it was a little less than a year of wait time to get this kit. I don't know what Kitfox's lead times are now, but that's a pretty typical window. I actually had an August production slot, so I did get it early, but because of the COVID-19 lockdowns in 2020, it ended up delaying my delivery even further. We'll not go down that rabbit hole. Anyways, it took me about 1.5 years to build, and about probably, let's say, 4 to 5 months to really get comfortable with flying it and get it to a point where I feel really good about the plane. Still a little bit of trickling, like little fixes and repairs and things like that. Why did I even decide to put a deposit on a Kitfox? In 2019, I really wanted my own aircraft, and like a lot of you think, oh, there's a couple ways of getting an aircraft. You can rent one, you can buy one, or if you really want to, you can build one. And it seems renting obviously has its drawbacks because you don't get to rent the coolest planes ever. That's a really loud truck. When you rent, you don't get to access to the best aircraft on the market, and you don't get to take it sort of whenever you want. You don't have the same freedom, but it is convenient because you don't have to shell out all the cash it takes to build a plane. When you buy, it's a very limited market, and most of the aircraft available are very, very expensive, and you have to usually put some work into them to get them back up to where you want them. Particularly in the aircraft I was looking for, there's a limited scope as to what you can actually do with certified aircraft. And that leads us to the actual building an airplane. That's the third option. You can go out and buy a kit and build an aircraft up to experimental standards. So why did I end up deciding not to buy a plane, and why did I decide to build a plane? Well, there's two sides of that. One, if you want a plane like this, a STOL or sort of bush plane. I was spending a lot of time in Alaska when I did put a deposit on this, and we were in the bush all the time, in and out with helicopters. So I spent some time in the bush with some Super Cubs as well, and I was like, this is the most fun way to fly an airplane, and it's the coolest way to see the Alaskan backcountry, to see it. In Idaho, there's all sorts of cool stuff to go out and see. So I was like, I want a plane that can go out and do that. So my options were basically buying a few of the experimental or the certified aircraft on the market, which is your Super Cubs, your Huskies, Mauls, 180s, 170s. There's a ton of bush plane that are available on the market, but they're pretty expensive. You're looking at, over probably $150,000 for something that's not just high performing, but also has modernized panel and anything like that. So you end up paying a premium for a certified aircraft. Now, you can also go and buy a experimental aircraft off the market. Those end up being pretty expensive too, and there's some question about what you're really getting from the experimental market when people build them. So the best decision, the decision I made was to build my own plane, because you can get a really high performing aircraft on a decent budget, and you get to put the best equipment in it that's pretty much available on the market. So that's why I ended up deciding to build my own airplane. Let's talk about my assumptions versus reality. So I'd never built a plane before. I'd never bought a plane either, so I didn't really know what it would take to truly build a plane. So I had a thought in my head of what it was going to be like to build an aircraft, plus then there was the actual reality of what it was like to build an aircraft. And almost de facto, none of my thoughts that I had previously held about building aircraft turned out to be the reality when I went to go build it. So I'm going to go down a list and talk about sort of my thoughts versus reality on what it truly takes to build an experimental airplane. So with regards to thoughts versus reality, I mean, I'm assuming that many of you out there have the exact same thoughts that I did before I started building this thing. And how would you really know what it's like to build a plane? I mean, yeah, I've done a lot of videos on this, and there's tons of other people out there building planes. But I mean, this is going to be a reflection on some of the big questions that I had in my head that I'm certain people have, and I'm going to give you an actual realistic representation of what these things are, rather than sort of a fantasy or a sales pitch that you'll hear a lot from the companies that sell these things. Okay, so the first elephant in the room, and the biggest elephant in the room, is budget. And this is definitely, my thoughts on budget were very different than what reality ended up panning out to be. So, and I know this is one of the biggest questions that I get. Oh, how much did you pay for this thing? What's the budget? You know, how much did you put into it? I get the question all the time in comments, in DMs, and emails, all sorts of stuff like that. People are always asking, oh, how much does it truly cost to build an experimental aircraft? That question is like saying, how much does it cost to build a car? Well, it depends. And the reality is, what I thought was, okay, I'm gonna buy the kit, which a typical kit will run you anywhere from $20,000 to $100,000. The Kitfox kits, I think, are running for $36,000 right now. That's for the STI kit. So what I saw was, oh, all I need to do is buy the kit, buy an engine, buy a panel, and that's everything I need to build the airplane. Unfortunately, that is not the case. In order to actually have a holistic budget, the kit is not complete. You'll see this, and maybe we can go pull some clips from the internet of kit manufacturers talking about the words, the most complete kit on the market.
We believe that we have one of the best kits in the market, one of the most complete kits in the market.
That is not entirely true. Now, I will say, Kitfox does a great job at putting most of the parts together, and it is a relatively complete kit. But when you buy this kit, you are still lacking a pretty large amount of parts that you actually need to it, and some of it amounts to pretty substantial expense. For example, covering equipment. Kitfox does not include all that you need to cover the aircraft, and they don't even put paint in there. So unless you want to run around with you actually couldn't run around with just a straight poly covered aircraft. You have to spend, a couple $1,000s at least buying paint and additional covering supplies. Now they include all the fabric that you need, some of the finish tapes, some of the initial covering sort of treatment, so like the poly brush, some of the poly spray, I think. But I didn't have any of the paint, so I had to go out and just buy paint, and it's pretty expensive stuff. And that's true with pretty much all paint. So for cowlings, for flaperons, all that stuff isn't included. So there's a bunch of parts in there that I don't know if they're strategically left out of the kit. I get different reasons for why things are left out of the kit, I make no judgment as to why it is left out, but it is something that you have to keep in mind. The ticket price that you'll get listed from the manufacturer is not an all-inclusive price, so you have to have some flex in your budget to understand that you're actually gonna have to go out and acquire some of these things that aren't included in the kit. So what budget should you have to actually build your own plane? Again, it also depends on how nice you want your plane to be, and that's a direct scale. Could you truly build a Kitfox from scratch for maybe under $70,000? Absolutely. If you want to nickel and dime yourself through the whole process and try and buy used motors, used propellers, you want to stick exactly with what the kit gives you, sort of cut corners on some parts, yeah, you can build these things on a really, really tight budget, and that goes for all aircraft that you build. The quality of aircraft is you basically get what you pay for, and there's certain quality of components that come at a price premium, but they do give you a little added sort of integrity in the process of building your plane. I personally did not want to cheap out on parts. I know it's a very popular thing in the experimental world of trying to sort of replace parts and sort of find cheaper alternatives, and I get that a lot of people do want to build an aircraft on a budget, so that's a whole scope, but that's not how I built this plane. Now, I didn't do the Mac Daddy best plane ever, sort of like Mike Patey's Scrappy, where he basically put, I don't know, probably $300,000 in that thing. It's what we call a money is no object project. Money was definitely an object on this, but I definitely didn't cut corners on the integrity of the aircraft. So Let's take some examples. My fuel lines. The stuff included with Kitfox for these it's just basic aluminum tubing. Do people use that successfully? Absolutely. Would I have been fine just using the aluminum tubing? Absolutely. But I decided that I wanted some better integrity of my fuel system, so I spent a little bit of time and money working with aircraft specialty hose. We'll put a link to the video about the hoses that I did. And I spent some time and money putting together a kit so that I'd had really high quality hoses, and my fuel system, oil system, and things like that would be top notch. So a good budget for building a Kitfox. I mean, the other thing is the engine. I mean, do you want to put a really cheap engine in there? Sure, you can do that. You can buy an old timed out, snowmobile motor, Subaru motor. You can buy an old Continental. You can buy all sorts of old engines and save money that way. But if you wanted a 912IS, I mean, that comes with a price premium. I think that engine itself is $20,000, something like that. And then do you want just a basic panel, or do you want a nice panel? So these are all things you have to think about. And I'm not judging whether or not it doesn't matter which decision you make, but that really affects the budget. So I would say a good budget for building a Kitfox realistically is $80,000 to maybe $180,000, depending on engine, prop, panel combinations. And that's a pretty good range. It'd be very difficult to do it for under 80. And I'd say realistically about $100,000 is a really good target price for making a really nice Kitfox STI. That might come as a shock to people, like, oh, I'm gonna spend $100,000 building a plane. It says on Kitfox that I only have to spend $30,000. I mean, that's kind of where my thought was, oh, it's gonna be a lot cheaper than buying a plane. But the reality was it ends up being close to the same price for an equivalent aircraft. If you wanted to buy a plane, this Kitfox off the market with equivalent setup and things like that, let's just say you wanted to buy a Super Cub that had this same performance, although a Super Cub's gonna outperform this in most scenarios. I mean, you're looking at $200,000. So maybe more, maybe less. It just depends on what mods and which version you have and all sorts of stuff like that. But it'd be very difficult to buy an aircraft for as cheap as you can build one, even if it's nice. So you're still kind of at a win, even considering the labor that you put into it. It's still kind of at a win compared to purchasing an aircraft. But there are a lot of other considerations to think about when building a plane other than budget. But hopefully that gives a realistic representation of what it truly costs and a budget you can expect for building at least a Kitfox. And now there's a million other kits out there, but that's sort of my experience. Okay, so the expectation was, okay, yeah, 30 to 80,000 bucks. We'll be out the door, good to go. We'll have a plane. Still be a big win over the purchased aircraft. But the reality was, it's actually closer to the $100,000 range, plus or minus a little bit, depending on how you want to kit it out. At the end of the day, that's what you're looking at for building one of these things. So one thing to definitely consider if you're thinking about building versus buying or renting, building requires an immense amount of effort. And that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of sort of an expectation for the effort required to build your own aircraft. My expectation was that this would be close to or similar to sort of more of an assembly process rather than a manufacturing process. My expectation was I would be able to use very standard, at least it's sold this way. You hear this quote all the time. It's like, oh, you can use standard household tools. You can build it in your garage. This is pretty easy to build. People build these in their garage. You hear this over and over again. It's like my expectation was this thing's gonna be a breeze. I'm really experienced with building stuff. So I was like, oh, I'll just throw it together and it'll be good to go. But the reality is that this is actually a very difficult thing to do, and it's an immense amount of effort, and much respect for anybody who's built these things. I've made a lot of friends in this experimental world, and I have an immense amount of respect for people who have put a plane together because it is a huge amount of effort. The expectation that I had was definitely met with some reality checks about the amount of effort and dedication and patience required to put this together. We can talk about some examples. Most of the time you spend is not actually doing things to the plane, it's actually figuring out what you need to do to the plane and solving problems and dealing with sort of trying to make minor improvements, and it's figuring is the word that we use. So the effort required, I built mine in actually pretty short time window. I got it in March, or actually I got it in April, and I built until June, and then was gone for 5 months, and then finished it the following, October or something like that. The full elapsed time was 1.5 years, and I was working on it a lot. I put a lot of hours. They used to say 800 hours. I think they're now saying 1,000 hours of build time. I didn't clock my hours, but it was a long, even with me grinding on it, putting a lot of effort on it, it was very hard. The last little bit took the longest part, like getting over the last final sort of 10% of work took a lot of patience and effort to do. It's hard. Man, it was hard. I know people who still aren't done. And you know, there's Kevin, I have no idea if he even is finishing his kit. So what you see a lot of, because it's so hard, a lot of people have the expectation that I did, which is totally understandable, that, oh, it's gonna be a breeze, anybody can build this in their garage. And then they get hit with this project. It's like, whoa, this is an immense task. And it almost buries you and, you know, makes you feel like, geez, this is gonna be hard. That being said, if you are a dedicated person and you like problem solving, it is a fantastic learning experience. And I don't know, I really enjoyed some of the skills that I got out of it. And it's like it's a feat. Once you get to the point when you're flying it, it's like super rewarding. So that effort, however, was not what I had expected. I put a lot more effort into this than I had an expectation to. So that's just sort of a reality check. Yes, it is a huge amount of effort to build one of these things. And I wouldn't believe most of the marketing that, you know, it's easy, you can build it in your garage, things like that. That's not entirely true. And you should have some good, like, sort of working with your hands skills prior to actually getting into this. But you can also learn that along the way. Maybe you just wanted to experiment with that stuff, but realize that there's a pretty high barrier to entry to getting this stuff done. So the next thing I'll talk about is the amount of space required. My expectation was basically what all the marketing says, which is, oh, you can build one of these things in your garage. And the reality is not entirely that you can build one in your garage. Okay, let me caveat this. If you have a really big garage, you can absolutely build one in there. But I'd say at least minimum you need a 2-car garage to build one of these things. And I've heard the word said, oh, you can build one of these things in your living room. And I would say, yeah, you could in theory build one of these things in your living room, but you basically would lose your living room and for probably 2-3 years, and I wouldn't recommend it. If you watch some of my old videos, I was working originally in this really, really messy shop out in Montana it was a big shop, but it was so cluttered that it was pretty tight. And then I moved to a different, bigger barn in Florida here, where on basically a farm that's not far from here. And then I actually ended up in the hangar. I would recommend the big space, because if you wanted to do things right, then it's nice having space and good tables. If you get crammed, it's very difficult to work, and you have to have workspaces and things like that. Then you get into the whole world of painting, which is an animal in itself, and was more effort than I could have possibly ever imagined. And you definitely can't really do that you can't do that in a living room. You could maybe do it in a garage, but having just a 2-car garage, you can watch Project Kitfox video. He bought this whole outdoor tent thing just to have space to paint. Yeah, painting is a lot of effort. So space required. Expectation was based on the marketing, you can build it in your living room. The reality is, yeah, sure, you could do that if you wanted to like dust up your whole house and kind of make a mess, but I would say that a 2-car garage at minimum is, at least for building a Kitfox, is probably the best scenario. Don't get me wrong. Are there people who have built them in their basements? 100%. So it's possible. It's definitely possible. But would I recommend it? No. Would I have been successful if I was building this in a basement? Probably not. So that was sort of expectation with reality versus reality for that one. So the next thing I'll talk about is tools required. There's the expectation versus reality. I actually have a tool list on my website. I have 7kilofox.com, and I've tried to keep that up as much as possible of all the different tools that I had to buy specifically to build this kit. So I was really thrown off by this. Kitfox sells a builder's toolkit that says pretty much all the specialty tools you need to build a kit. And that's kind of how it's marketed and sold. And I would say definitely get the builder's toolkit because it's super helpful. But that is by no means a conclusive list of tools that you need to build the plane. You can see this in some of my older videos. I was always buying some specialty tool, and I actually whined about it a lot because I was like, am I really buying this one tool just so I can do this one thing one time? Another tool that just came in today is this solid rivet tool. I am very impressed. It was expensive, but it is the nicest tool I think I've ever bought. In reality, there's like no way around doing it. And there also are some shortcuts that you can take to actually save on a tool budget, but you end up buying a lot of specialty tools that you're only going to use once. I actually, towards the end, decided that I'd rather hire somebody to do a professional job than buy a specialty tool just to do it myself. For example, I guess upholstery work, there's all sorts of special adhesives and tools that you can use to do upholstery. And I did not want to do the upholstery because I was kind of running out of steam. And so I just took it to an upholstery shop and had them do my upholstery for me. Can you do that yourself? Yeah, but are you gonna have to acquire special tools? Yes. So in terms of affecting your overall budget, that's not even something I really talked about, but you know, I don't even wanna know, go into how much I've spent on acquiring tools. So on top of your actual build budget for the raw materials to build a plane, there's also an additional budget for tool acquisition. Assuming you have drills and just like a basic shop of vise, pliers, screwdrivers, things like that. Assuming you have those things already, then it's not that big of a lift. There's a lot of specialty stuff that you have to get. But if you don't have any tools, man, you have to really spend a lot of money to build out a shop. And that's definitely something somebody should consider when they're building one of these things. It's not something you just kind of want to fire up in your living room and start, you know, wrenching on with whatever you have in the kitchen drawer. You kind of have to have a specialty shop to build this stuff. And the better your tools are, the easier it gets. One of my big complaints with building this is I didn't actually have some really, really high-end tools that they definitely have at the Kitfox factory that would have saved me an immense amount of time. But not only saving time, but it makes a much higher quality product in the end. So basically, the nicer your tools, the better the product. And that's something that, again, expectation was any old tools that you have in your kitchen drawer plus your garage will work, but the reality is there actually is a pretty large list of specialty tools plus other generic tools that you should probably have in your quiver to build this right. Now, I kind of did it as I went, which kind of hurt me because it takes a long time to get some of this stuff. So that was a big blocker. It's like, oh, I get to a point, oh, I don't have a tool for that. Okay, I have to go figure out what tool I need, and then I have to find it on the internet and then order it, and that's a couple week process. So if you talk about, we'll talk about timeline soon, but that's when I talk about figuring. That's a lot of the time spent and the effort is like, ah, crap, how am I even gonna do this? I need a tool for this. Where do I get that tool? Okay, let's go find a tool. I found a tool. Now we have to wait, a couple weeks to get it, and then it comes in, and then you can actually do the work. So there's another sort of gotcha that I had. Okay, so the next thing I'll talk about is the skills required. And I've already touched on this a little bit, but you have to be honest with yourself before you build an aircraft. I had an expectation that I had the skills required to build an aircraft. The reality is I did not have the skills required to build an aircraft. And I learned the skills required to build an aircraft. So unless you're like a machinist or you're like very talented with building things, it's very rare that you'll come in the door with all the skills required to build an aircraft. And there are still things that I didn't even want to learn how to do because they're so specialized that I'd rather just hire some professional to do it. There was some machining that was done, some welding that I had done, some upholstery stuff. There's all these other specialty tasks that was just sort of better to have somebody else do. A lot of my paint work I had some help on, or not just the urethane paints I had help with. You have to be honest with yourself before you build a plane and say, hey, do I have the skills required to build a plane? Well, a good reality check would be, could you build a kitchen table for yourself? If you feel like either A, I can build a kitchen table for myself right now, and it would be nice, or B, yeah, I could figure out how to build a kitchen table for myself and I would feel confident enough to do that myself. If those two answers to that question are yes, then you definitely have the skills required to build an aircraft. I had a lot of experience when I was in high school building cabinets. I actually won the Montana State cabinet making competition when I was like 13 or 14. So I spent a lot of time working with my hands, did a lot of computer-aided design, and did some just basic sort of manufacturing. But what I had an expectation was that this was an assembly process, meaning you're like sort of like a Lego or a Rector set model. The reality is it's actually a lot of manufacturing. You have to shape parts. You have to sort of somewhat machine parts. You have to manipulate raw materials into an actual part. And the FAA requires some of that manufacturing to be a legal kit. So that's sort of something you have to keep in mind. Like a lot of this stuff isn't gonna fit right off the shelf. So you have to have the skill capable to make it fit and sort of manufacture it to a point where it works for you. Just to be clear, I don't want to be a downer about building an aircraft. I don't want to discourage anybody from doing it. And I don't want to say, oh, if you haven't built your own kitchen table, you can't build an aircraft. That's why I say, this is just my expectation versus the reality of what it was. And I thought it was, what it was sold and marketed is that it's this easy assembly process. The reality is it's actually a very challenging manufacturing process. And there's a reason why it takes some people 3-4 years to build some of these things, because it's very technically challenging. If you aren't super mechanically inclined, or you don't have a huge record of manufacturing or building or constructing things, you're not like a fabricator or anything like that, then you have to spend a lot of time training and understanding the right steps to take to actually build the aircraft. So timeline, a lot of that is dependent on 1, your budget, and 2, your skill level. Also 3, your schedule in general, like there's a time budget in there, but I built mine in about 1.5 years, plus a 5-month hiatus, so it's maybe a year if you want to talk about total build time. And I was very dedicated to building it. So on the Kitfox website, they used to publish a number of build hours. It used to be 800 hours for the build. I think it now says 1,000 hours, but I have to double check that. What I did was I did the math and I said, okay, in my off season, I'm gonna work 7 days a week for 8 hours a day. And how many days is it gonna take me? And I ended up coming up with, oh, I could get this done in 6 months. I can get this done in 8 months. And I did actually think that early on in the build. I was like, man, I'm flying through this. The early stuff goes really quickly. My expectation was, oh, I'd have this thing done in under a year and I'd be flying and we'd be good to go. Well, 1.5 years later, I ended up finishing it. So it wasn't an actual representation of the timeline that I had expected. So the reality is that there were a lot of things that I didn't understand how to do. I didn't understand what I truly needed to do the task. And I didn't understand the amount of effort and skill required to actually complete certain things. So it took immensely longer to do seemingly simple tasks than I had expected. For example, painting this plane, I think took 3 months for me. Is that because it should take everybody 3 months? No, it's because I had no clue how to paint an aircraft. I had no idea. Was way in over my head. And I watched videos and I read blog posts and I went onto the forums and I tried to talk to people. I went and talked to professional painters. I talked to other people who had built aircraft. And it was effectively this massive research effort. Plus, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what material I needed to acquire. I spent a lot of time trying to redo and undo some of my mistakes that I made and trying to correct things and trying to get things perfectly correct and all sorts of stuff like that. So in terms of timeline, it's unrealistic unless you've built one of these before or you're like an actual manufacturer or fabricator professionally. It's unrealistic to think that you can do this in under a year. If you fall into the second category, when we're talking about building tables, if you fall into the second category where you know I can't build a table today, but if you ask me to build a kitchen table, I could figure it out. If you fall into that second category, then you're looking at least a year of construction, and it takes some people even longer than that. Maybe 2 years is realistic. 1,000 hours is what Kitfox says now. I don't even know what that means. Is that 1,000 hours thinking about the plane? I don't know. Is that 1,000 hours sanding? I probably spent 50 hours alone sanding, maybe even more than that. I spent a lot of time sanding. There's just all these little things that eat up a lot of time, plus the thinking, the figuring. So a reasonable budget for time is about 1 to 2 years, maybe 3 if you're really trying to take it slow. Of course, budget can affect that. If you have a budget allocated for your project right away, then you can do everything, but sometimes maybe people don't have the free capital available to spend on their project, so that might slow down your part acquisition, things like that. Okay, so there's 2 more things I'll talk about. One of which is the manual, and the other one is the forums, and they're closely related. But we'll talk about the manual first. The manual is available online. The Kitfox manual is available online, so you can read through the whole thing if you want. The forums are also available to the public. Anybody can go on and ask questions on the forums and have them answered. I had spent a lot of time on the forums prior to actually purchasing a Kitfox just to understand sort of some of the questions that I had about performance. My experience before I bought the plane with the forums actually made me feel like there was actually quite a bit of support for these aircraft. And that's actually one of the things that informed my decision to actually buy a Kitfox. I was like, wow, they have this awesome forum that is a huge resource of knowledge to answer questions. And the other thing is, you look through the manual and they have very, very good, well laid out instructions on how to actually complete pretty much all the tasks. So the expectation was that I would have all of the support and knowledge I needed within those 2 resources to actually complete the plane. The reality of the matter is that neither the manual nor the forums are sufficient enough to understand everything that you need to know to build a plane. The manual, and I've talked about this in other videos, the manual has not been updated, I don't think, since 2017. I think they've made some edits here and there, but there are some times that I was very, very frustrated because the manual said to do one thing, in reality, you should have done something else. If you look at just the cowling on the plane, you can see a reason why. The manual said to cut a hole that was 9 inches, and the reality is you have to cut it to 11. And that's something that is known within the community, but there hasn't been an effort to correct the manual. I know that this is very common. I know that it is very hard to maintain manuals, so I understand that it's a huge effort to edit those things and keep them up to date. But it is definitely something that is reality, and that's not something I'd expect I was dealing with. Sometimes the instructions, most of the time, the instructions are bomber. I mean, it walks you right through it. There's no question, there's no ambiguity. But then sometimes you get to these points where it's like pretty shaky on what you have to do, and sometimes it even might misdirect you on things that you have to do. There isn't any effort, I don't think, from Kitfox, at least last time I checked, to actually update the manual. And there's definitely some known flaws in the manual that I've made notes to in my videos. So again, if you're building a Kitfox, go ahead and watch all my old videos, because I pretty much noted all the major gotchas that I've run into sometimes in the book. So you don't necessarily need an up-to-date manual. You can just watch through my videos, Project Kitfox videos. I mean, there's a bunch of other people who have made videos considering some of the sort of gotchas and things to know about building a plane. But it is something that I had no expectation that that would be the case. And it was probably one of the most disappointing things about building a plane, that I actually run into that issue. Man, just thinking about it brings back some thoughts of some immense frustration, because it's a huge amount of cost. I mean, I wasted a lot of time and resources dealing with things that could have been avoided had there been better instruction, or more clear instruction, or the correct instruction rather than the flawed instruction. Just these stall fences right here is a perfect example. I just put those on. I have a video about it. Why did it take me so long to get the stall fences on? Well, because the manual neglected to tell me something about these stall fences that everybody knows you have to do, but I painted them and everything, and turns out I had to modify them later on. So I put all this effort into painting them, getting them prepped. Turns out I had to later modify them, and they don't even have the right paint on them right now. I mean, they're fine. I just put Krylon on them. But that's the type of frustration that you can deal with in dealing with this. Now, does this apply to all aircraft manufacturers? I'm certain it does. I don't think Kitfox is unique with this. I think maybe with the exceptions of vans, I'm pretty sure most manuals have huge holes in them, because it's an incredibly complex process. It would be almost impossible to properly document exactly all the time. So unless you have like a software maintaining it, which I think Vans does have like a submission, like the RV series for that, but I can say that Kitfox is a little behind on that one. They are doing these build videos, which I'm super excited about, and that's gonna be a huge resource. Like I can't tell you how helpful it's gonna be to have Kitfox producing videos, so I know that that's coming soon. But I just right now, it's not the best. And that was an expectation. Now, with regards to the forums, this might ruffle some feathers, but I don't find the forums to be immensely useful. Just because somebody's built one of these things in the past doesn't mean they necessarily know how to solve the problem. And there's a lot of pride in the forums. A lot of forums get into like these stupidly heated debates about stupid stuff, and it's a lot of wasted energy. The way that the forums questions are tagged, it's like not very well sorted, so sometimes it's hard to find information. A lot of guys do these build series threads where it's like, oh, whatever, I'm doing my build, and they include everything there ever is to know about that in the series, but it's not very cataloged, so you maybe have to go to page 100 of their forum. I mean, the Control F function works pretty well, but you're just overwhelmed by just frivolous stuff in there that I didn't even really, at a certain point, I stopped using the forums because I find them to be more of a waste of time than they were actually worth. So a lot of the basic stuff, the forum can be a huge help with. But when you start getting into the higher level of complexity, I mean, sometimes you're beyond the knowledge level of some of the people on there. And I mean, sure, there's a lot of AMPs and IAs and stuff that are pretty valuable, but I found myself referring to, practicing aircraft mechanics more than I did on the forums. I don't really know who a lot of these people are on the other end. Look, let me caveat this. I'm not an IA. I'm not an AMP. I don't know any of these things are correct. I'm just sharing with you what I did and some of the things that I had problems with and struggled with, and then some of the solutions that I came up with. Whether they're the right solutions or not, doesn't matter. It's just for you to decide as to whether or not that's something that works for you. So forums, again, will ruffle feathers, but the forums didn't crack up to be a useful service to me in the end. I stopped looking. At a certain point too, the manual was almost more distracting than it was helpful. And that's where when I talk about the figuring process, you're almost better off using your brain than trying to be a drone and follow instructions. So yeah, I know that's complicated, and that doesn't really answer the question of the support. I don't really know. It is what it is. It's not going to stop people from building a plane. So if you want to build a plane, there's nothing I can say to stop you from building a plane. And if you don't want to build a plane, there's pretty much nothing I'm going to say to get you to build a plane. I'm just trying to give you my experience in this whole process. So the last thing I'll say, expectation versus reality. We'll follow this, sort of wrap this up on a high note. What was the actual expectation on the total overall process? Would I do this again? The expectation was I'd be building basically tons of these, and I'd feel like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be an aircraft builder, and we'll do version 1 and then get better at it and build version 2. I will say this, I've already thought about building another plane. It is an immensely rewarding process. And the fact that you can actually get out there and fly this, I mean, I can just go fire, we're gonna go fire this thing up right now. That to me it exceeded my expectations. The rewarding feeling of actually building your own plane and going out there and flying it, that exceeded my expectations, but in the positive direction. So the reality was, I thought it would be awesome. That was my expectation. The reality is, it was really awesome. It is really awesome. So I definitely encourage anybody who feels like they're qualified. I mean, I laid out some of the things that you should definitely consider. You should definitely consider these things before you do it. I'm not saying just go in there blind and believe everything that, the, Carbon Cub marketing page says to you, or the, Highlander aircraft website says. Don't believe everything that you read on the internet. I would even question some of the people who are posting on the forums, and a lot of people see the world through rosy-colored glasses. And sometimes, particularly the manufacturers, want to sell you products through rosy-colored glasses because that's how they make money. And I'm not faulting them for it. That's just standard sales practice. What I'm saying is that definitely have realistic expectations when you want to go build a plane, and understand that it ain't going to be a walk in the park. You're not going to just breeze right through it. It's going to be probably one of the more difficult things that you've ever done in your life, but it will probably be one of the most rewarding things when you get at the end. And ask yourself, are you truly qualified and ready from a financial perspective, from a skill perspective, from a space perspective? Are you truly ready to take that on in your life? Is that something that you feel comfortable with? Do you have a hard time completing projects? Do you have the endurance to really sort of hammer yourself through the whole project and get through to the end? Those are all things that are realistic things that you should keep in your mind that I just wanted to share with everybody. Would I do it again? I don't know. Right now, I'm kind of tired of sanding things. I'm tired of painting. If I did it again, there's no way I would paint this thing. I'm done painting. I hate painting. I've got paint all over my clothes. I've got paint on everything. Paint's a huge pain in the butt. I still got to do touch-up paint on this thing. I never want to do paint again. I hate painting. So if I were to do it again, I would probably build an aluminum skin aircraft just because it would be a different experience. Something like a, I don't know, like a Zenith. I know they're weird looking, but like an RV. That would be an interesting process. But I would say that the most annoying part that I don't want to do again is paint. If you take the paint process out of there, we're good. It's a go. But you put paint in there, I don't want to do it. So that's that. Hopefully this is helpful. If anybody has any questions, feel free to hit me up in the comments. I kind of get behind, and on Instagram is probably the best way to get a hold of me. I definitely do try and get back to everybody who has any questions. The budget, I mean, people always ask me how much I spent about this. I can't answer that because I don't have an audit of how much I spent. So I can give you a ballpark. It's somewhere around $100,000 bucks. Yeah, that's the reality of the whole matter. So yeah, thanks for watching. We're gonna go out and do some flying, and see you on the next one.